Welcome to Birdseeds, episode 2 of season 2. Super excited to be here. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you get something out of it. And thank you for listening as always. Before we jump into kind of a recap of episode 1 of the season and get into today's topic, I want your feedback. How does this sound? I have a new microphone. If you're watching on video, you can see it. It's a Shure SM7B. It's been a microphone on my list for a while. Finally glad to have it here. And the Shure SM7B requires a little bit more gain than your typical microphones. At least your typical dynamic microphones. It's a higher end dynamic. And so because of that, I have it running through a PreSonus Tube Pre V2, so a Tube Pre. So it should, if this sounds the way that it should sound, you should hear some warmth, some super crisp clarity. Let me know what you think of how this audio, this vocal sound compared to prior episodes. Love the feedback. Always trying to make it sound better and better over here. So last week we talked about how I gave myself grace going through one of the most challenging times that I've gone through. And super personal grief, lost my mother, and spent about 6 weeks really just caring for her at the end there and just dedicating everything I did to making sure that she was comfortable, that she was loved, that she knew how much she was loved, and to help her, transition on. And in that process, I did what had to be done business-wise. I did the task that had to be done that couldn't be, and I'm so thankful for my team that they stepped in and they were able to cover me a lot. But I didn't force myself to do something that wasn't essential, that I knew I was just going to be showing up for. I wasn't going to show up ready to go. I wasn't going to show up excellent. I was just going to literally check a box and show up. And that's not beneficial to anybody. And so I committed myself for doing that. And something I mentioned on that was the discussion of grief, and I said I'd get to that later. So what I want to do today is I want to just talk about the process of grief, at least my experience with it. And whatever I say here, please understand that my intention is to share my story in hopes that it resonates and helps somebody else through their story. By no means is it telling you the way you should feel. Grief is a very personal journey from what I understand. And it's just sharing my experience that hopefully somebody gets something out of it. If not, oh well, then just ignore it and go through your experience. What has surprised me the most about grief is, even though it's so impactful and it's so meaningful and it's so heavy, it's very disorganized. Well, what do I mean by that? So typically something that's going to have a big effect on you, we could go to like an analogy of like a battle or something. Very organized troops in a very organized manner with very, wind or air, land, water attacks, everything's organized. Boom. It's big impact. This would be the equivalent of like just rogue soldiers coming out, doing whatever they want to do. There's no general, there's nobody leading it, but it has the same effect. It's just relentless. So how that's experienced by me, if you will, it's unpredictable. We could be in a moment that you would have zero expectation of feeling the grief, and then boom, there it is. And they talk about the 7 stages of grief, and they talk about all those things. And my expectation of that was going to be that you're going to feel those in like a specific order. And that just hasn't been the case. The feelings are there. They come and go. And, something that I was talking to somebody about it, saying, I'm really good. I've really built a great job of self-protection and avoiding and hiding from some feelings. But I've come to find out that my feelings, if there was an Olympic sport for hide and seek, they'd be the gold medal winners, because they find me. And they find me when you're least expecting it. So let's go through what those 7 stages of grief are. So the 7 stages of grief: shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. Again, I was sort of expecting to go through that list, and that's just not the way it happened. The shock factor shows up all the time. I remember my son Jameson had a shutout playing goalie for the first time in ice hockey, and I was so excited to call and tell my mom. That's a shock when you realize that doesn't happen. Denial, I wouldn't say that I've gone through denial specifically in that denying that it happened, but I think that's the avoidance side of things. It's just I don't want to think about it. I don't want to accept it. Anger, certainly there's been plenty of moments of anger. Unfortunately, it comes out not the way it's directed, not the way it's intended. It's just the person or the incident that just sets you over the edge, that's where it comes out. It's unfortunate because those people get the short end of the stick. But that happens, and there's no, again, rhyme or reason. It's just you get angry over the most random thing, but it's because it's all built up inside of you before you get to that. Bargaining, negotiating, yeah. I mean, I don't know how that one's affected me. I am sure it's there without a doubt. Depression, yeah. There's a lot of days I just don't want to get out of bed. I just don't have the energy, don't have the motivation. Why? What's the point? What's it worth? Yeah, and that one again, it just, some days you wake up and it's like, I don't know what happened. I went to bed fine. What happened overnight that now I just don't want to do it? Testing. So just sort of seeing what's real and what's not. Acceptance. I mean, that's the final stage. I guess that one probably happens in order, but acceptance and processing aren't necessarily the same thing. Acceptance to me is more like acknowledgement than it is like processing it. I mean, I guess it's probably in between. It's part of that process. But yeah, I mean, that's, those have all happened in just different random orders for me. One thing that really kind of caught me, and the way that she went, you know, it was 3 weeks in the hospital and then 3 weeks of home hospice care. So it wasn't out of left field. It wasn't like an accident or something, or, you know, there was time to process it, which I am so thankful for. Those times to say those things, there's nothing hanging on my head. There's nothing hanging on her head. She got to see everybody. She got to say everything she wanted to say. Like, yeah, I'm so thankful for that. But I just sort of assumed, and here I go, you know, being assumptive and naive, but I just sort of assumed this has been coming. We know this has been coming. I've been processing this for the 6 weeks. The event happens. Of course, there's an immediate sadness. But I thought I was just kind of get on the other side of that. And yeah, I'd be sad, but I'd just be able to kind of go on. Because again, I had 6 weeks to know this was coming, and a varying level of like realization of how serious it was. And then this is what's going to actually happen, right? Well, versus if like somebody was in an accident or something was like just totally shock, like when you find out about it, it's already done. And you kind of have to grieve it then. And this is where I talk about, like, I don't want to, everybody has their personal grief process. So if you had a loss of life and it's, you know, a shock and you didn't process it in the moment, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's the way that I sort of think it would be. Whereas this case, I thought like, oh yeah, I had a lot of time to process it. It'd be fine. But it was the opposite. I had a lot of time acknowledging it. I had a lot of time knowing it was coming. I didn't pretend like it wasn't happening. I dedicated those 6 weeks to her, basically. But I didn't process any of it because I spent that entire time focusing on her and other people, focusing, making sure that she was loved and taken care of and comfortable, focusing on my dad to make sure that he was taken care of and he had his needs met, focusing on my mom's sisters, my aunts, making sure they were good, focusing on my kids, making sure they understood what was happening, had their opportunities to see her, focusing on my wife to make sure that she had an opportunity to see her, all the above, right? Don't get me wrong, I focused on me. I was there every day. That was not just for her. That was for me too. But the focus was on preparing. It wasn't on actually processing. It wasn't on actually understanding what it was going to be like when it happened, what it was going to be like, you know, afterwards. It's yeah, it's a lot. So, you know, you live your journey. Just do it. You got to feel the feels. You can't hide from them. You hide from them, they get worse. They fester. Feel the feels. I lost both my grandparents about 6 months apart back in 2011. And that's like the closest grief that I've had, you know, compared to this time. And I remember feeling a sense of relief when that happened. We did hospice at home. I was a primary caretaker from them. I was doing the overnight care, doing morphine overnight and things like that. I lived like literally up the hill, and we had a baby monitor. They'd call for me when they needed to go to the bathroom. So I really dedicated to making sure that they were taken care of, and that's great. I'm so happy to have done it, proud of doing it. Oh, that's great. But I remember feeling this sense of relief. It was over. And then I remember immediately feeling horrible guilt about that. I had a very good friend who lost his mother, probably a year, maybe 2 years ago. And I reached out to him. I said, hey, when you feel that sense of relief, it's okay. It's natural. It's not relief from them being alive. It's relief from the situation of taking care of them. So it goes right back to last week's episode. Give yourself grace. Just cut yourself some slack. Do the best you can do. Live through it. Process it. It's okay to be sad. Actually, it's good to be sad. So thank you guys for listening. Birdseeds, episode 2. Have a wonderful day. Can't wait to catch up with you guys next week.